What was the Berlin Wall? Why was it put into place? How did people feel about it? This is the story of the two Berlins. As World War II came to an end in 1945, Germany was split into four Allied occupation zones. The western portion of the country went to the United States, Great Britain, and France, while the eastern part of the country went to the Soviet Union. The city of Berlin, however, was located within the Soviet part of the country. It too was split into similar sectors. The United States, Great Britain, and France took the western half of the city, while the Soviet Union took the eastern half. With capitalism being the primary model of West Berlin's economic structure, it stood in stark contrast to the Soviet socialist model of the GDR, or German Democratic Republic. Soviets wanted desperately to drive out West Berlin. In 1947, the American and British sectors combined their sectors into one, and the French would later join as well. In 1948, they created a new currency for their occupation zones called the Deutschmark. This new currency was created to bring the people out of poverty. This devalued the Soviets' Reichsmark currency, something they were not too happy about. In 1948, the Soviets blockaded West Berlin, seeking to starve out Western allies. There was much debate over how to respond to this. Available options were to retreat, start another war, or stay and be forced out. But President Harry Truman would have none of this and simply said, "We shall stay. Period." There was another option on the table, which was to fly supplies into Berlin via planes. It would take 1,300 flights per day, but it was possible. So instead of retreating, the Western Allies supplied their sector of the city from the air. This was known as the Berlin Airlift. During this time, more than 2.3 million tons of food, fuel, and other goods were delivered to West Berlin. It was also a motivation for the creation of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO. The Berlin Airlift lasted for more than a year until the Soviets called off the blockade in 1949. Tensions began to flare again in 1958. As the Soviet Union was embarrassed by the endless flow of refugees from the east to the west, nearly 3 million refugees had fled since the end of the blockade. Many of the refugees were young, educated, and skilled workers, leading to what has been called as a brain drain. By 1960, this massive immigration left East Germany with only 61% of its working age population. The losses were heaviest among professionals like teachers, technicians, lawyers, and other skilled workers. The brain drain and mass immigration became very damaging to the economy of East Germany, such that the Soviets felt that the securing of the East German territory was imperative. In 1961, the defections from the GDR to Berlin reached tens of thousands per month. On August 12, 1961, Premier Khrushchev gave permission for the East German government to stop defections for good. The early stages of the Berlin Wall would begin. The Berlin Wall started as a barbed wire fence and a concrete block wall. East German troops and workers tore up streets along the border as to make them that vehicles could not pass, and installed barbed wire and fencing along the 97 miles that bordered West Berlin. August 13th of 1961 became known as Barbed Wire Sunday. Over time, the wall would be upgraded to include reinforced concrete with the top of the wall crowned with smooth pipe, so that it was more difficult to scale. Other features of the wall would include an anti-vehicle ditch, lighting, observation towers, electrified fences with alarms, spikes, and a sandbank known as a death strip. The Berlin Wall, however, did not stop refugees seeking to get from the east to the west. From 1961 to 1989, more than 5,000 East Germans managed to cross the border into West Berlin. Life in East Berlin was horrific. East Berliners were treated very poorly compared to those in West Berlin. They felt trapped behind the wall, experiencing shortages of food, water, and money. The communist economy brought suffering. They were shot if they tried to cross the border for a better life. Telephones were tapped, communications and movements were placed under surveillance. East Berliners were not allowed to watch television or listen to radio from West Berlin. Religion was frowned upon, and for most people, even a college education was prohibited. Anyone who broke the rules of the oppressive Eastern government risked being imprisoned or killed. Life for those living in East Berlin was bleak and miserable. Life in West Berlin, however, was rather prosperous. With a Western capitalist economy, people were allowed to buy and sell as they pleased. Life offered more opportunity in West Berlin. Because of the difference in the two economies, many East Berliners saw no other option than to cross into West Berlin. The wall that separated the city was hated by so many people on both sides. Toward the end of the 1980s, the Soviet Union was beginning to dissolve due to increasing economic problems. Communism as a whole was failing the people of the Soviet Union as communist governments of the Soviet satellite states began to falter. The Cold War began to thaw. In 1985, Mikhail Gorbachev became the eighth and final leader of the Soviet Union. As Soviet General Secretary, he recognized that the standard of living of the people of the USSR was struggling. So, he began to announce policies of open debate, referred to as glasnost, as well as economic reform called perestroika. He did not seek to remove communism, but rather to reform it. Mikhail Gorbachev was the right man at the right time for the ending of the Cold War on Russia's part. Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev forged a working relationship which made diplomacy and dialogue possible. On June 12, 1987, Ronald Reagan visited Berlin. Standing in front of the Brandenburg Gate, President Reagan delivered his now famous speech, in which he demanded that Mr. Gorbachev tear down the wall and open the gates.
And now the Soviets themselves may, in a limited way, be coming to understand the importance of freedom. We hear much from Moscow about a new policy of reform and openness. Some political prisoners have been released. Certain foreign news broadcasts are no longer being jammed. Some economic enterprises have been permitted to operate with greater freedom from state control. Are these the beginnings of profound changes in the Soviet state, or are they token gestures intended to raise false hopes in the West or to strengthen the Soviet system without changing it? We welcome change and openness, for we believe that freedom and security go together, that the advance of human liberty can only strengthen the cause of world peace. There is one sign the Soviets can make that would be unmistakable, that would advance dramatically the cause of freedom and peace. General Secretary Gorbachev, if you seek peace, if you seek prosperity for the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, if you seek liberalization, come here to this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev began talks in Moscow on May 29th and signed a treaty restricting intermediate-range nuclear forces. On October 5th, 1989, Gorbachev denounced the Brezhnev Doctrine, the idea that Moscow could intervene in Soviet bloc nations if socialism was perceived to be under threat. On November 9th, East German government announced that it would shortly open checkpoints in Berlin. More than 2 million people from East Berlin visited West Berlin to participate in a grand celebration that was dubbed the greatest street party in the history of the world. People were seen using hammers and chisels to knock away chunks of the wall. Soon, cranes and bulldozers were tearing down sections of the wall, and Berlin was united again for the first time since 1945. Reunification of East and West Germany was completed on October 3, 1990. The failure of the East Berlin economy struck a blow to the Soviet Union as well as to communism itself. Not only did the Berlin Wall divide Berlin and its people, but also separated the Soviet Union and the United States. When it was torn down, the people of Germany were much closer to the Western Allies than had ever been before. Leaders at the time of the tearing down of the wall were the perfect people for the perfect time. The only reason why the wall was able to be eradicated was because of the diplomacy of President Reagan and General Secretary Mikhail Gorbachev. Many people remember the wall as something that separated Berlin. While that is true, the Berlin Wall also brought NATO together and helped bring together the countries a part of it.